Recently, NASA and the company Axiom signed a deal agreeing on the terms of the first ever all-private mission to the International Space Station. Also recently, new astronauts arrived at the station for SpaceX's Crew 2 mission. So with all of the excitement at the space station, today on Space Chat, that will be my topic. I'll be talking all about the International Space Station. For those of you who haven't been here before, Space Chat is the weekly show where I take a deeper look at Earth, the universe, and beyond. So without further ado, let's talk about the space station. The International Space Station is an orbiting laboratory and the single largest structure ever put into space. Now, the main construction of the space station happened between 1998 and 2011, with NASA space shuttle missions helping to piece together the facility. In total, 15 different nations contributed to the space station, with the US, with NASA, Russia with Roscosmos, and the European Space Agency being the three major players and funders. Other partners have included the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency and Canada's Space Agency. Now, as of July 2020, 242 different people from 19 different countries had visited the space station, and since then that number has grown even further. Now, with the space station's major construction finished in 2011, that was, not coincidentally, also the year that NASA's space shuttle program ended. So for many years, while NASA has continued to be a major player and had extremely major involvement in the space station and its activities, NASA astronauts have been launching to the station from Roscosmos' spaceport, the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Now, that is until commercial crews started getting off the ground. Last year in 2020, SpaceX launched Demo 2, its crewed test mission to the space station with 2 astronauts on board its Crew Dragon vehicle. That just sparked an absolute barrage of crewed commercial missions to the station. These were the first crewed missions to launch to space from America since the end of the space shuttle program. So with the rise and continued growth of the commercial space sector, and with future crewed commercial launches on the horizon, we can only expect this number to seriously continue to grow. Now, the space station is currently scheduled to operate through at least 2024, with a possible extension to 2028. As this date nears, plans will be made to either continue extending the mission and use in orbit, or possibly deorbit the space station or recycle its parts and reuse them in other ways back on Earth or in space. Who knows? So that's a little bit about the space station, but why do we have one? Why do we need an orbiting laboratory circling our planet from space? Well, the space station is one of the most incredible scientific tools out there. Because of its unique location, being in space, we can do science in an environment that doesn't have gravity. Now, it's not technically fully zero gravity on the space station because it's still so close to Earth that there's the slightest influence, but we refer to that as microgravity, or very close to absolutely no gravity in the environment on board the station. This means that scientists in space, or scientists collaborating with astronauts, can conduct experiments that range anywhere from studying how plants grow in space to how different fluids act and react with gravity to so much more. Research done in space, it's not just to benefit space and space exploration. Research in space has come from and benefited just about every field, from plant science to microbiology to materials science and so much more. There have been countless experiments done on the space station. Now, these experiments have been conducted for a number of reasons. Some have helped to develop medications or have studied other human health conditions, and other research has contributed to our understanding of different types of materials, how fire behaves without gravity, and so much more. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of Space Chat, recently NASA and the Texas-based company Axiom Space signed an agreement about the terms for the very first fully private astronaut mission to the space station. And they hope to launch this mission as soon as January of 2022. That's this upcoming January. Now, the agreement with NASA so far only includes a portion of the exchanges needed to actually make the flight happen. However, Axiom hopes and aims to ultimately launch a mission called AX-1 that would send both a retired NASA astronaut along with 3 passengers to the space station, and they would get there aboard one of SpaceX's Crew Dragon vehicles, and the whole mission would take about a week. Now, they wouldn't be the first private astronauts ever, or the first non-professional or private astronauts to fly to space. However, this would be the first mission whose crew would be entirely non-professional or retired, so entirely private astronauts. It's not the first mission that would ever put private astronauts in space, but it would be a big step forward in private space flight. So that's a little overview of the space station and where we are right now with this orbiting lab. Now, this brings me to my favorite part of Space Chat every week: question and answer. So every week that we do Space Chat, I take some of your questions that you've sent over the week. Sometimes you send them on social media, sometimes you drop them into the comments down below, sometimes you even email them, and I answer as many of them as I can. So I'm going to go through some of those questions. If you have any space questions, I'm always looking to answer cool space questions, so it is always a good time to send those over. So let's get into it. All right, Space Enthusiast on YouTube asked, is it hard to move in a space station? This is an interesting question. So I can't say from personal experience, I've never been on board the space station, or any space station for that matter, but astronauts have reported that it takes quite a bit of time to adjust to living and working without gravity. Everything from just moving around in general to eating to sleeping, everything seems to be a little bit more difficult. All right, Sarah Guy on Facebook asks, will there be a space station in Mars orbit one day? Really interesting question. So right now there are no current plans for any company or space agency that I know of to put a space station around Mars. It's possible that in the future that may happen. I don't know of any existing preliminary plans in development for such a thing. Now, when it comes to the moon, not Mars, but the moon, I guess in a way you could call NASA's development or idea for the Gateway kind of a space station, right? Because it's going to be an orbiting outpost that orbits around the moon, or at least that's the plan. So kind of, sorta, not with Mars, not that we know of yet, but I think it would be really interesting. All right. Okay, CJ on Twitter asks, will Elon Musk put a teacher or any civilian on the space station? I say go for it. So this is a great question. I love the enthusiasm. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Axiom Space, a different company, is working with NASA, again, preliminary, still in development, to hopefully launch an all-civilian or all-private, non-professional astronaut mission to the space station this upcoming January, or as early as this January. Now, I know that SpaceX has shown interest in private astronaut flights as well, and in fact, with this Axiom flight, if and when it happens, it will be using a SpaceX spacecraft. So, yes and no. I think it would be really cool. I don't know when or if SpaceX will do this kind of thing completely on its own. I don't know if Elon Musk personally will be putting anyone on the space station, but certainly SpaceX, which he founded, is definitely involved in private astronaut missions and the development of them. All right, Star on Twitter asks, there are 11 astronauts on the space station. How do they all shower and use the bathroom in peace? Great question. So there aren't 11 right now. There were 11 astronauts a little while ago, briefly for a few days on the space station. And this happened, Crew 2 arrived, but Crew 1 hadn't come back to Earth yet. So it was really a full house on the space station. In fact, it was more than a full house. There were so many people on the space station that there were 2 Crew Dragon spacecraft docked, and the commanders of each of those spacecraft actually slept in the Crew Dragon spacecraft overnight because there weren't enough beds on the actual space station. They put out some temporary sleeping quarters as well, and they really all just made do, and I'm sure were respectful and understanding in the extra crowded environment during that few-day period. All right, Tara on Twitter asks, are there any plans for a bigger, better space station, and when can we expect it? So that's a great question. So with the International Space Station, right now it's going till 2024, maybe 2028, and then it's going to be reassessed what's next for it. Now, there's no explicit plan to directly replace the International Space Station with a brand new International Space Station. I mean, just putting it up there and building it was a tremendous effort. But over the years, they've added to it, they've repaired it, so many spacewalks, keeping up with it, maintenance, etc. But that is not to say that there won't be other different space stations in the future. We all saw that rocket booster from China fall back to Earth and safely into the ocean recently. And that was actually, that launch sent up a piece of China's own space station that they are hoping and working on building themselves. So, you know, the International Space Station is not the first ever space station in general, and I don't think it will be the last. So I'm curious to see what happens with the ISS, what ends up happening with it in the future, but it will also be interesting to see what happens later on, what new stations might arise. Okay, Pat on Twitter has a funny question. Are astronauts required to wear a dress code on board? You never see band shirts or neon pink catsuits. Why? Well, while I do agree that band t-shirts and neon pink catsuits would be incredible to see on the astronauts on the space station, I would love to see more fashion, of course. There is no actual dress code. They can basically wear whatever they want, and sometimes you'll see them in shorts or t-shirts. Obviously, whatever they wear has to be safe for them and the people around them, and kind of work with the general environment, which has a number of challenges, both for comfort. I'm sure getting dressed is more challenging, might be kind of hard to put on a neon pink catsuit, but often when we see them on the space station, they're on TV doing news conferences, talking to the media or sometimes celebrities. And so when they're doing things like that, they're obviously a little more dressed up and professional. So you'll see them in their NASA polos or their JAXA polos and their khakis or what have you. So we usually just often see them in that same general attire. We also often see them in Velcro pants or Velcro pieces of clothing that help them stick to the walls. So there's no real strict dress code, but you can't really wear whatever you want in space because it's hard to be in space, is the gist of it. Okay, the dude on Twitter asks, who is currently bunking in Dragon? So no one right now, because they are no longer a full house with 11 on board, but at the time when there were 11 on board, the commanders of each Crew Dragon slept in their spacecraft. Which, you know, I don't know, would you rather sleep on Crew Dragon or on the space station? I feel like it might be kind of cool sleeping in a Crew Dragon docked to the space station, kind of like you had your own little room, kind of like space camping. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Would you rather sleep in Crew Dragon or the space station for a night? What would be your bunk of choice? Okay, Brian on Facebook asks, what's the status of the mold problem on the space station? So for those of you who don't know, occasionally mold crops up on the space station. It is not a place completely devoid of microbes and of moisture, and of course, us being humans, we bring microbes and moisture along with us everywhere we go. So it makes sense that occasionally mold would pop up and be a bit of an issue. Obviously, they're very aware of how to take care of it and handle it, and they're kind of, you know, just persistently keeping it at bay. So don't worry, there's no mold like taking over the space station. I do feel like I probably would have heard about it if it was, which, you know, if I hadn't, be a little concerning. All right, Simone on Facebook asks, a few years back, I remember that there was a part of a human heart valve, 3D printed in 0G. Has anything like this been done on the space station? What other medical experiments have been done for health applications here on Earth? Great question. So I don't remember that specific experiment, but throughout the station's history, there have consistently been, I mean, dozens and dozens of human health experiments done on the space station. There have been many pharmaceuticals developed with the help of researchers on the space station, everything from fluid dynamics to studying the pharmaceutical compounds themselves, and just studying human health in general. I mean, the astronauts are really incredible test subjects, as well as scientists and researchers in their own right. So they are often monitoring their own health and how humans physically respond to living without gravity, which might seem like, oh, well, that just tells us how astronauts live. But by studying astronaut health, we can actually learn quite a bit about the human condition in general and can study a variety of different issues and human health concerns. So I don't remember that exact experiment, but there are consistently human health experiments on the space station. I'd be curious if you want to check out what's up there right now. That's always fun to do because I'm sure there is at least one going on at the moment. There usually is. But yes, tons and tons of those types of experiments. Right, Mark on Twitter asks, when the space station finally goes out of commission, what will happen to it? Will we dismantle it, or it will remain in orbit as space junk forever? Great question. So it's possible we'll continue to extend the life of the space station, but yes, eventually it will go out of commission. At some point in time, the International Space Station will be no more, very sadly. And we're not sure exactly what will be done with it. That has yet to be decided. But the two most probable things are either it will be recycled with its parts reused for other things, whether brought back to Earth, certain things brought back or certain things not, or recycled in some way. It's also possible that it will just be deorbited and will burn up in the atmosphere. So those are the two main possibilities. Something that big, I don't think that they would just leave in orbit because that would be quite a big piece of space junk, which could cause a lot of issues. Raymond on Facebook asks, how big is the space station compared to old stations like Mir or Skylab or Tiangong-1? Great question. So, the space station that we have right now, the International Space Station, it's bigger than all of them. It's huge. But that's not to say that the others were totally tiny. While the space station we have now is very large, Skylab was really big. It was certainly smaller than the space station, but it was pretty sizable. Mir was a little bit smaller, but still pretty sizable. Salyut 1 and Salyut 7 were quite a bit smaller. So the International Space Station is certainly much larger than all of those. All right, Julia on Twitter asks, how do the astronauts aboard monitor or prepare for space junk impacts? Well, there aren't really any. Every once in a while there will be what we call a micrometeorite that hits the space station. That's fairly commonplace. Occasionally they'll have to do repairs based on those impacts, but there's never any danger of anything big enough hitting the station that could shake it, or if you think back to Star Trek, them all holding on and moving around with impacts. It would never be anything that big that they wouldn't move out of the way of, because they can do that and they can do certain maneuvers if they anticipate running into something big. But there's nothing really that big that they're currently in danger of impacting or that would just kind of hit them and they would have to deal with. All right, Lawrence on Facebook asks, how does one keep the inside of that thing clean and fresh and running properly? And Lawrence, my answer to you is simple. Elbow grease. Astronauts work really hard. So that was all the time we had for questions today. But before we go, I'm just going to quickly let you know what else has been happening in space. So what's new in space? In addition to this recent news with Axiom and NASA, tons of things have been happening. Ingenuity, NASA's Mars helicopter, made its 5th flight and began a second leg of its mission, an extended operations phase. SpaceX is planning to launch a mission to the moon funded entirely by Dogecoin, the meme-inspired cryptocurrency. China's rocket core safely landed in the ocean after re-entering Earth's atmosphere the other week. Rocket Lab recovered a booster from one of its rockets after a launch, and a study found that Mars might still be volcanically active. So again, that was all the time that we had for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, stay tuned right here at space.com, and join me next Friday for another episode of Space Chat. And again, as always, if you have any space questions, send them my way, and you might hear yours answered on a future episode. Take care.